Welcome to another episode out of the blank. Sebastian is back after we just had
Oh,
our
yeah.
awkward little session. Welcome back.
Never
How's it
mind.
been? It's been a little bit.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Yeah.
I,
Making strides and interesting times for sure.
are you working on anything new?
Not new, but kind of deepening the same thing, and kind of honing the ceremony aspect of the practice of what working with the mushroom and learning, constant learning.
Have you ever tried questioning not only ourselves but just kind of everything? Like, I used to take things like kind of not really seriously, but it used to anger me about a lot of stuff. It still kind of does, but I find more I laugh at things more now, and it kind of eases the tension in a lot of these subjects. Like, I get really interested into the government stuff, but I started analyzing more. It's just like once you start noticing the manipulation of everything, of from news media, making people outraged, and then you see the government be like, okay, well, if they take guns away, the next they're going to do this type thing. And it's like, oh, it all kind of like one plays one hand, the other plays another hand, but they both are going towards the same goal. Like, I started seeing more of that happen. I started seeing so much divisiveness in the world now, where I'm not even mad at it. I'm just like more keen on it. And I think like being aware there's a burden and a curse that comes with it, which has really started for me to analyze everything, like legalization of all drugs, for instance. Some places have done that, and some places have seen really good results from that. Maybe it's just you were sales pitched something wrong. And I feel like a lot of people thought for a very long time pot was the worst thing in the world, and then they realized the benefits of it. And I think that's like that with everything. I think we're getting a bad sales pitch on a lot of stuff, which everyone is always their first impressions of something. And then they label it as such, and then they never dive down that rabbit hole again. And in necessarily some aspects that might be good. But I started to realize I think as people, we don't kind of serve our own opinions or our own perspectives. What we do is we take information from everything, and we've kind of filtered it in by what a lot of the time people form their opinions is something that someone told them, which necessarily might not be the truth. And it's caused me to look deeper into myself. I wouldn't say like in a psychedelic way. I'd say more on an aspect of like, are my thoughts my own? Am I thinking how I'm supposed to be thinking, or am I thinking because I've been regurgitated information that I continue to regurgitate onto other people? It's a weird conflict. I'm lost, and that's okay. But at the same time, I'm trying to pick up them breadcrumbs of what I left to be able to trace back to where it all began.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
It does make sense. I mean, in a way, part of the change, I suppose, recently that I've had is basically like unplugging completely. So I don't watch the news. I don't, I'm kind of basically off social media. This is a very like long standing debate among, in the kind of religious and spiritual practice, which is how do you relate to the world, as in the worldly world, what I call Babylon. Babylon being principalities and powers, that the whole thing, as you say, government, media, etc. And there's a temptation to kind of be really either afraid of it or kind of like disparaging or hate it, or push it away. And how do you reconcile these two things, to be in the world but not of the world, that kind of thing. And recently I think that through my Christian practice, I've come to an understanding that the only way, the phrase that came to me was just to pray for Babylon, basically. That, it's not something that we can get rid of or defeat or escape. You can't run off into a cave. It's the same as the relation you have with your enemies. We're told to love our enemies. That's really hard when it's a real enemy that's actually doing something, that's real and bad. But to be able to love your enemies, be able to love Babylon, is basically to pray for them, because that ultimately they're on the wrong track and they're suffering. So it's not a kind of like black and white, good and evil type thing. It's that we just have to just try to, you know, bring all these qualities of compassion and patience, you know, to the world. And if that, the only way to do that involves stepping back a little bit so that you don't get sucked into the whole drama of it and the whole blah, blah, blah. And the, you know, as you say, the push and pull, the polarization of, you know, that's partly the fuel that keeps Babylon going. So in a way, by withdrawing that energy and basically, you know, in a way, seeing both sides in any of these fights as being caught in exactly the same delusional patterns, basically, all you can do is, like, you know, pray for them and give them compassion and hope that they will, like, wake up and stop it, you know.
Maybe the cure would be just to stay off social media. I think what
Well,
happens
that's a good start.
well, what I started realizing about myself is that I see things differently than other people. I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about any of that. I mean, I just see the world differently than a lot of people do. Mostly people say it's an eye for photography with a lot of the pictures I take about things. Like I took a picture of a doorway that's just in my house, like in the hallway, but the sun was creeping in through my stained glass in the front of my door in such a way that it just was like an orange glow. And yeah, I put it in Instagram and filtered it a little bit, you know, up some shadows onto it. But I started noticing is like, especially with doing like the film that I'm working on, I'm capturing angles of scenes that you can just do in your house that are everyday things, but just with the type of angles that it is, it makes it look really good, even though it's shot from an iPhone. And I started kind of understanding is that this is constantly around us, and it's the beauty that would be in the world that we all talk about, which we all know exists. But every single day when you're looking on your device, it's just constant negativity, riots, protests, people getting shot, people getting killed, people getting robbed. And I think maybe that is also what drains our own happiness. I think to get happiness within yourself, which everyone talks about, that's the first step. I think there's a step before that, like a kind of like a warming up to the whole first step. And I think that's just understanding that there is evil in this world, but it does not lurk around every single corner. You should be weary of your enemies. You should be weary of the things around you, but the fact that you have enemies in the first place already means you're not coming to the table clean. And that has always been what I've tried to instill with at least every conversation I've had is don't come in with any preconceived notions of hate. Just come in with who you are as a person, and people will accept you as such. The ruling factor of authenticity. It's very, very hard to understand if someone's being authentic or not. But the more you start to understand what authenticity is, you're able to find it as such. You know, if someone's turned off by a certain thing, you'll notice the qualities in the way that they look, the way that they move, the way that they do certain things that seems kind of like they're in the wrong place. With 1,000 episodes, I've stayed consistent with my same train of thought, my same types of thinking. Now, my perspective has changed. I have evolved, but I'm essentially the same person, just with more miles tacked on. And I think that's because I am who I am. And I think for a long time, you can be repressed to not be who you are in this world because of the way someone might think of you, the way you might think others would react to you. And I essentially think those aren't the people you should be looking to guide about who you are. I think the way that you can find out who you are, the way that you feel inside is going to make you a happier person, whether that person's an asshole or not. It doesn't matter. If you people hate who you are, then those are essentially aren't the people that appreciate who you are. Maybe you're trying to be something that you're not, or maybe you're afraid of being something that you are. And I think that's a cause for change, or that's a cause to understand who you are, because trying to adopt a personality, trying to adopt a characteristic that you see on television, a Matthew McConaughey, I'll talk with a fucking Southern accent if it counts. But is that essentially me? No, it's somebody else that I'm mimicking. Well, then there's where you lost the step, because now you're already distorting the world around you to where you can't find the beauty in it anymore because you're too worried about saying, all right, all right, all right, every sentence you say. You're not seeing the light that's bouncing off the concrete. You're not seeing the little plants that grow in the cracks of your driveway that you hate so much you spray with weed killer because it doesn't match the other houses in the neighborhood. Well, what's the beauty in that, though, that there's a life that we just consider weeds or we consider lesser than other plant life, but it's still trying to find a way to do its thing? Shouldn't you be trying to do your thing instead of worrying about the cement or the gravel roof that they put above you? I don't know. I'm not trying to get deep with it. I'm in this realm of self-perspection or self-perspective, I would say, where I'm trying to analyze, especially coming up to the 1,000 mark. I'm like, that's a lot of people. And I'm just kind of getting reminiscent in the times of when I listened to my first episode to where I'm at now. And I start to realize, like, first of all, I go, what a cocky piece of shit in the beginning. But at the same time, I look at, like, I think everything has kind of changed in a sense for a good and a bad. And I think the good is what I just said. And then the bad is kind of something else.
Wow. Well, a couple of weird things. One is just before coming online, I thought of Matthew McConaughey. Is he called Matthew McConaughey? This actor.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Yeah, literally just popped into my head. And like, I've never thought about him before. Weirdest thing. Apart from when I saw him on a podcast with Jordan Peterson, which is why I don't know why it just popped into my head. Anyway, and I was wondering I wonder what he's up to now, because I remember when he started.
You start to question more about this synchronicity kind of thing. Like
synchronicity, it's happening a lot. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll message someone and they'll be like, "I was just thinking about you," and I'm like, "Yeah, I do that all the time." Someone,
it's very
I just
strange.
get a random idea in my head about somebody.
Yeah. Very weird. Anyway, but interesting that you're coming up to this milestone and just doing this sort of retrospective and thinking about where you've kind of been and come from and traveled and what your evolution and process has been, and thinking about, you know, who you are and, you know, these kind of identity questions, which again is something that I've been thinking about and talking about again in terms of religion. Another thing that popped into my mind yesterday, which I actually tweeted, was the best hiding places for the ego. This is what's with a tweet, are SBNR and RBNS. I don't know. Do you know what I mean by that? Mm-mm. So SBNR is short for spiritual but not religious. And then RBNS would be religious but not spiritual. So that was just something that occurred to me, that a lot of people who say they're spiritual and, you know, but they don't like religion, they don't like organized religion, they're not religious. This is a very large chunk of Americans and British and European people now. It's kind of like rising demographic when they do surveys about people's, affiliation.
Religion makes it seem like you're stepping in line for like a soup kitchen or you're walking into a door in a formation, when spiritualist means like, I still like the concept, but I don't want to be limited to a foundation or a building of worship.
Exactly, something like that. Exactly. So you're not affiliated to anything, but you kind of, you know, have this vague sense of, I don't know, of the God or the universe or some, generally a kind of new age type vibe. But what I've noticed with people, and I was like that for a long time, I suppose, and I was just thinking about what the difference is when you do kind of say, okay, I'm religious. What is the difference? And I think it is to do with a basic kind of like belief about exactly who am I, about who you are, about your identity, and ultimately about your ego. Because if you're spiritual but not religious, you can still keep your ego, because you're like, okay, you know, there's this other power or whatever it happens to be, but I'm not gonna like submit to some, like, I'm not gonna do what some random priest tells me or what the church says or what, you know, or this kind of like organized thing. It's like, I'm my own boss. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm spiritual. Don't tell me what to do. You know, so you could keep your ego, and I'm authentic. And like, I'm, you know, and I'm my, what's that phrase? The secret, sacred self. I have my secret, sacred self. Yeah, I'm like true to myself. So this is a kind of very modern belief, you know, connected to individualism, et cetera, which is when it's linked to spirituality, is even more sort of tenacious, more difficult to let go of, in terms of actually surrendering yourself to something greater, larger, mysterious, to basically maybe to accept that you don't really know who you are, or you're not really who you are, or who you could be, or that these experiences of, the light on the cement and these, those moments where you feel, let's say, attuned to the world and to reality are actually the moments where you're not authentically yourself, in the sense of like being your ego or your personality. You're just being. And then ultimately, I think that's what the religious kind of view is. The difference is that it's a simple choice. It's either you or God. And that's it, basically. And I think that the spiritual but not religious hasn't made that final step. They want to have you want to have your ego and God, if you know what I mean. You're not going to give that up.
What about for the people that aren't religious, though?
Say that again?
What about for the people that aren't religious, like myself? Like, I'm not religious. So when I die, I think I just die. But I started to notice through my life now, I think I have a different term of what death is. I don't look at it as another awakening, but I used to be afraid of it when it came. And I'm not saying I'm not afraid of it now. I just think about it differently, especially when it comes into the realm of mental health. Men are more likely to commit suicide. Men are more likely to get drafted into war. Men are more likely to deal with mental health issues and not talk about them. That's statistically. But I start to wonder more about this type of talk when we talk about mental health and we talk about someone who's, dealing with something and looking at the end. I used to think like, damn, that's a grave point. Or maybe they just look at it differently than how we do. I've had a bunch of my friends have taken their own lives before. Someone that said that they were going to do it and they did do it. Not even a week after saying that they were going to do it, which is intense because people say like, oh, I just wish it would end. You don't expect them to actually do the act. But I think it's been changed. Throughout history, it's been known as like a self-sacrifice. Throughout history, it's been known as something different. And I started to look at it a little bit differently when you start basing the concepts of, I think people judge their actions on the amount of time that they have. And I think the fact that you don't know how much time you have, you just expect every single day to wake up with something working properly and not functioning wrong. Like, we all wake up and we do our tasks that we have, our little goals in our head. But what happens if your heart stops? What happens if your lungs don't work? What happens if something just goes wrong in a random minute that next thing you know, that person had an aneurysm and is dead? You don't know when those things are going to happen. So trying to base your actions or your plan off of a time that you have, hopefully maybe living 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, I think that's dumb. I think the fact, if you really, really fear death, if you really are scared that when your time is up, you're going to either go to a heaven or a hell, or you don't know what's going to happen, I think you're already doing it wrong. I think you should just understand that the life that you have now is the life that you have. But when you overthink it into a grand aspect of where you go when you die or what happens when death comes, I think it's just different to me now. I don't know. When I was a kid, I used to think so much times of like, oh, you got to be a good person, go to heaven, got to be a bad person, go to hell. But now at this moment in my life, in this moment in time, I start looking at things a little bit differently, where I start going, why am I thinking about the afterlife? Like, you're fucking planning your timeshare of where you're going to be when you die. Like, a lot of people think about that way too much. And I look at it as a concept of, isn't this life, like, nobody has an answer. We have faith. Sure. I'm not taking that away from anybody, but I think you start to overanalyze things too much, and you start to have preconceived notions that, like my buddy, for instance, he was religious. Well, I'm pretty sure in religion, they talk about if you kill yourself, you're going to hell. I'm 100% positive. I think that's why they did tier that. Now, is that something that was just propagandized into our heads? And that's not the truth, because I know my buddy and he was a good person, but I don't know. And it's made me question more things now, where I start looking at like how much of the story from the original faith, where we link into spirituality, these people that don't want to worship in a church, is because necessarily they don't believe that God hates fags, or they don't believe this type of term that people spread around about religion. And I saw this in a show called Middle Ground. I think we've talked about before, about people coming together with differences. There was Satanists and there were religious people. I was listening to them talk, and damn it, they all had really valid points on everything. I was sitting there kind of like, if I was sitting in the room, I'd be crossing my arms like, yeah, you got me on that one. Hey, that's a good point too. You start to understand. I think everybody has this idea and belief in something more or something bigger than us. And I think it's egotistical to think that there is nothing bigger than you. But I also think it's important to understand is at the moment in the time that you're living right now is that you need to have that self-identity. And if that does help with faith, that gets worse with faith, I don't know. But I think it's an understanding of you are who you are. The decisions that you make are your own, and you can't let people control you in a certain way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel like a lot of people get their information off of things that they see rather than what they feel. And I think that's even influenced then too by religion in some aspects is too. So I wonder who I would be without preconceived notions into my head on faith, on, I think we're all code. I just think our code and our bodies have been messed with as such. Mostly the whole thing is information. Me talking to you is information. You talking to me is information. And we're constantly receiving and sending signals left and right. If you want to say that's God, sure. But I still wonder, what will we be if there was none of that? What will we be if there was just nothing, no government, nothing? There was base start when the human species first started. Would we have this idea and how it's changed about death, suicide? Ancient Egyptians did it for religion. People did it for honor. And we just think of it really, really differently, where I wonder, like, were those people wrong? No. Are we wrong? No. It's our level of thinking. And I think when you start understanding is that anything that you've ever been told or everything that we understand in this world is just something that has been agreed upon by other people. Like normal, that term normal. The fuck does that mean? Normal? Are you normal? I'm not normal. That I know plenty of people that aren't normal. I think normal's planned, but normal is just what we all agree upon. So it makes you know what I'm saying? I'm thinking deep now. Like I'm into this whole entire like analyzation of everything where I start to wonder, I was like, maybe we all just got a wrong pitch or a wrong group of dice.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, okay. The other side, like I said of the tweet, was is not just spiritual but not religious is a kind of hiding place for ego, but religious but not spiritual. So in a way, that's kind of what you're partly describing as well. So if you just follow what the religion says and this and that, and like whatever happens in the afterlife and what the church says, and you judge other people who are different, etc., and you just blindly follow the religion without having the spirituality. So without kind of interrogating, without having spiritual insights and experiences that are your own, that but you're just going through the motions basically. That's also ego. It's a different kind of ego. So like in my system, I probably mentioned it before, that would line up the top half of my little diagram that I have with the Wheel of Life, where you have the divas, which is basically the ego, but then you have the Muppets and the Muggles. So that this would be either you go along with what you're told, which is the Muggle. So you basically you just follow whatever religion in the broadest sense is telling you is right, or you kind of react against everything. And this is the Muppet, which can be very reactively anti. So a lot of the conspiracy theories, a lot of the distrust, a lot of the comes from a different kind of ego, kind of fighting spirit, as it is in the Wheel of Life. Anyway, they're just different ways that the ego takes as a kind of defense against ultimately just being. So I mean, in a way, we're kind of saying the same thing, that you're
well, that idea of conspiracy might be a confliction with an ego. I start to understand it's like, but wouldn't truth be a confliction with ego as well too? Because technically, the way that people stand on things is maybe they got the wrong information that led them down. What's the right information? I don't know. That all inflicts with everything. I think everything that is possibly out there, the things that get labeled as a conspiracy, the things that get labeled as truth, the things that get labeled as this, they're all just narratives that are more popular than other ones. For a long
Yeah,
time, we thought
exactly.
there were no aliens out there. Now there's ideas there might be other extraterrestrial life leading here.
Exactly. So whether they're right or not, that about aliens, about the moon landings, about whatever it happens to be, about narratives around politics or, you know, or science or the pandemic or blah 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 blah, whatever your view or your opinion, or, you know, ultimately the point is that it kind of matters, but also it doesn't really matter. And that's also part of what I was trying to say at the beginning about the kind of religious attitude where you just, you again, it's this thing about having enemies. You said, you know, maybe there's evil in the world, there are bad people, that you have to, you can't be naive and think that everyone is good and wishes best for you. You know, you do have enemies. So at the same time as seeing the enemies, you have to accept that they're enemies, but you also love your enemies at the same time. So in the same way, you see that there is Babylon, there is this kind of system of whatever it is, corruption and you know, manipulation, and, you know, this world of confusion and conflict. It exists, but you pray for it, in the sense that you don't have to get involved and sucked into it. You just wish the best for it, that it can sort itself out. And in a way, it doesn't matter. You don't have to get in there and decide, are there aliens or not? Was there a moon landing or not? You know, and get involved in the narratives. And this is partly the problem of what Babylon, how it works, I'd say, you know, about social media, well, media in general, everything. It's that we're basically being trained to live in the world of narrative, in basically in a mental virtual reality, you could say, where basically what counts or what matters and what's real and what's valuable in life is about what position you take on different issues. So ultimately, all of that kind of traces back to this idea of ego, because your identity in that model is about the constellation of the narratives that you basically follow, that you ascribe to, how you define yourself, your identity, which, you know, has been taught to us that this is this. I mean, in a way, even identity politics is that basically I am who I am, whatever it happens to be, whether my gender, my sexuality, my race, etc., etc., etc. The most important thing is your identity, being true to yourself, people respecting how you are and who you are, and you know, and you are the arbiter of that. In a way, you decide that, and that's obviously gone to extremes. And you know, when you get to the point of like choosing your gender and this kind of thing. But not only that, but that your whole being is simply the kind of accumulation of all of your consumption of all this information. So if you see the world as just basically a flow of information, you know, the some that you take, some that you don't, some you agree, some you don't, you know, if that's the world you're in, you know, which is a kind of like matrix of information that you know, you kind of like position yourself. This is Babylon. This is what I'm saying. And this is exactly what we need to pray for, but also to escape from. It's not something that you can, I mean, it's not just a question of happiness, but it's not something that you can be fulfilled in. It's not something that you'll find yourself in for real, is what I'm saying. You won't find your real self there, however much you shout about how authentic you are, because you're not. You're just a cipher for all this information. You're just a node in the network.
Do you think that when the idea, if we talk about the apple in the orchard, do you think that Eden was just ruined? Do you think that it not only just, we look at it as dooming a place that might be perfect or with no essential flaws, but we didn't expect it, and we don't really relate it to the fact that it might have doomed me, might have doomed you, might have doomed any single person to deal with wars or whatever the type of conflicts that have completely trashed any essential thing of, I think that we think about everything too much. I think the idea that we have to think, or the idea that we don't we even act with feelings over thought as at times too. I think critical thinking is important, but we wouldn't have critical thinking if there weren't reasons to be critical thinkers. We wouldn't have feelings if we there weren't need for feelings. If we just did, would we have any? Would why do we have causes for our actions? You know what I mean? Like there's, I start to look at like the back. Let's take it back to the garden. Did anybody think about war? Did anybody think about this? But you bit into an apple, you broke a rule, and the next thing you know, all this got flooded onto the earth. But that didn't just damn them, that damned us. That damned everybody. That damned everybody to a place of there's no perfect level of thinking. This idea of peace and love. There was a mindful meditation class, for instance. It used to be called Love and Happiness, but nobody would sign up for a class called Love and Happiness. You think everybody would want love and happiness, right? As much as they say they want love and happiness, but it sounds too hippy dippy. It's because people aren't
Yeah.
happy with the things, even if it's right in front of them. That's the thing is
Mm.
I think the idea that you can look at information, I think we all have our own realities, and I think that's what gets us through the day, but I think that's also an essential part of who we are. The idea that information, if you just look at everything as codes or numbers, like how I do, I think people can look at that in a bad way, but I look at it as a fucking great way. I think it's awesome that I can look at you and see how much wisdom that you could part onto me or information you could part on me where I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your ideas because I can't think like that. I think differently than you. That's the important part about it. But I think people look at it as like, well, you must be cold. You think everything's like a matrix, robotic. I'm like, it's not like that. It's more like that my coding, who I am, if I lose an arm and someone puts an arm on top of my arm, which has been done, and the person's body for the past 5 years has been trying to reject it and do all these types of things because it's not a perfect match, it's because his codes don't match the other arm's codes. I start looking at that. That's fucking fascinating. That makes this whole life a little bit different. That makes our whole pathway a little bit different. That makes everything in this world have a little bit more wonderment inside of it. And I think you can choose to look at that in a different perspective. And I think that's the whole point of maybe perspective might be the key to our own happiness. Might not be psychedelics, might not be religion, might not be war, might not be politics, might not be this, that. But I think it's the way that we choose to view things. Essentially, my viewpoints aren't any different from your viewpoints. And I think that's
Okay,
part
but
about
let's.
coming to the table clean.
All right. Uh, well, let's go back to the information thing, because you mentioned information and you also mentioned wisdom. Yeah, so that what you appreciate in a way, talking to all these people. I mean, like incredible that you've done like nearly 1,000 podcasts with all these different people. It's an amazing exposure to all sorts of different ideas and different ways of thinking, etc. But would you say there's a difference between information and knowledge, maybe, which is maybe one more step of processing of information, and maybe wisdom being another step? So, for example, recently I watched a thing by a Sikh guy, because I have a friend who's a Sikh, and he sent me this thing. And they talk a lot about gurmats. They call it gurmats. Mat is kind of knowledge or wisdom, and gur is from the guru. So they follow their 10 gurus, and so the wisdom of the guru is the thing that as a Sikh, or a Sikh as they say, they try to emulate, so that their culture is very different, obviously, to the Western culture, which again, like talking about, is very individualistic and like me. But their view is that the guru has wisdom, and that what they're trying to do is trying to match or meet the wisdom of the guru. So if the guru is the arm that you're kind of like grafting onto your own body, so to speak, if your code doesn't match that arm, then again, this is a religious attitude. That's your problem, because the guru is the one who has the wisdom. So you're the one who needs to learn something. It's not that you're on an equal footing, that you have different information, he has different information, you have one code, he has another code, and then you can just bring it to the table and it's all fair and square. For a Sikh, they have to learn the gurmats, the wisdom of the guru, that they have to internalize in themselves through their being receptive to that wisdom, if you know what I mean. Which is exactly the same in any tradition, but that's maybe a different kind of let's say a different worldview to the one that I think to what you were saying, which is that it's all just like neutral code, if you know what I mean, and that we're all just
the type
different.
of thinking that a master sees a beginner and says, this is a person that has to learn or get to the wisdom that I have. I look at it a little bit differently, because I think a master, a true someone who understands, would look at this person as there's a way that you can learn from each other. Even if you understand that there might be a training process or so, but I guarantee you, you give me and you give someone other task on the other side of the world, the same exact lifeline, the same exact storyboard. We're going to do the same exact things. The same task will be completed, but in different ways. Get up this wall. You see two kids run up a wall. One kid runs up it differently. Another kid walks around it, says he could have just did that. Is it smarter or is it worse? No, it's just two people getting to the same core solution, just in different pathways. I think of that like that.
Well, yeah. So that, I mean, that's obviously going to this issue of being a good teacher or not, and obviously a good teacher can see what's appropriate in individual cases, and you know, you have a relationship with a student so that, you know, they find their own way, but you're still guiding them to a certain end to get to the top of the wall. Do you know what I mean? It's not like there is no wall.
My value if I was 80 years old compared to the value of a small child would be both equally of value, one seeing with fresh new eyes and one with wisdom to share, correct?
Well, I mean, again, that's like the old saying that as the adult is to the child, so is the sage to the adult. So you know, the kind of the religious view is that even as an adult, we have as much to learn from the wise, from the guru, from whoever it is, as a child, exactly, as a child would from an adult. So of course, a child has its own, you know, its own wisdom, its own spontaneity, its own innocence. But, you know, obviously there's a lot that it has to learn about the world and that life that it doesn't know. So that's the view, that basically it's the same, not the same, but it's an analogous kind of like learning gap that needs to be taken. Whereas our culture teaches that as an adult, you're done. And as an adult, you have rights, and people, you know, you need to be respected in whatever you choose in terms of your, again, lifestyle, your identity, your opinions, your views, your et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and everyone's equal. And that's the kind of modern view, and in a way that's what's created, I'd say, in extremists, let's say through media as well, which ramps everything up, this kind of, as a, you know, I call it Babylon, you could talk about the Tower of Babel. It's basically all against all, you know, and it's a whole confusion of voices of everyone pulling against each other. And then the solution to that, let's say the liberal progressive solution to that is, well, everyone's different, and we just have to respect everyone's differences, and, like, you know, live and let live, and that's it.
Liberal
and, you know
perspective. I mean,
what else?
That's not a fucking.
What else can you say? I know, but
that's not how that's how they maybe say they are, but that's not how they are. They punch you in the face or take your fucking money or something.
Exactly, because it doesn't work.
Well, the idea that you have to pick it's that tribe thinking. Being in a tribe is amazing. It feels fucking great when you have a bunch of people that agree with each other, and it feels awesome. But I don't necessarily think you should be happy being comfortable. I think you should want to fight for that uncomfortability, whether that's getting in a topic where two people disagree or whether that's getting into something you know you don't want to talk about. I think that's important to do. I think the level playing field, or the idea, ego to me, is when you feel like you're the only thing that matters and everyone else should just step aside and bow down to you like you're royalty. I think a lot of people get that jammed up into their head. I think it's very, very difficult to, if you asked, put me in an interview for anything and then put me up with someone who has a master's degree. Already the person who's thinking about prophesizing for their business is going to say, well, I want the person with the most college education. Well, what about the idea of value? Because I guarantee you I can take them out of any subject that they've studied and they don't have any experience in anything. I've met plenty of college educated people that can't hold up a conversation in anything but that specific topic and refuse to explore anywhere out of that topic. Doesn't mean that they're an idiot. It just means that I think the way that we deem value is the amount of titles that you can place onto somebody. instead of the essential value of what this person or who this person is. And I think I've started to think about that a lot more, because the best conversations I've had with people have been people that don't have any attention at all. Actually, the people, the most famous people I've talked to, my heroes, weren't that good in conversation in some aspects. It just, there's not a same level playing field. They come to the table like, this interview, it needs to have a certain amount of views for me to want to be on it so I can get attention. It's got to benefit me. When other people who don't care about that stuff just come to the table happy to chat, and you start to see the engagement and conversation, I think that's value. I think the way that our minds, I guess, understand things, or I'm not trying, like I said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not anything. I'm just me. But my thoughts about things have started to change the more I started to understand about how everything's a little bit of bullshit. And not in a bad way, just I think people hold things too accountable for stuff. I think the idea that for the longest time they said they could flip-flop back during this pandemic about everything. They labeled things as a conspiracy. Then it turns out it's not a conspiracy. And then it's this and then it's that. With so much flip-flopping back and forth, you don't understand if it's just someone trying to spin a narrative in a certain way. Where I start to understand is like, you can't destroy your own happiness by letting in what you think is this or whatever information this is. I think the idea that religion is important. I think the idea of just being who you are is important. I think everything's important in its own aspect. I think you just have to understand that the reality that you have is not the same as everybody else's. I'm not saying you, I'm just saying broadband people want you to be in their thing, or they cut you out. That's a lot. I mean, it's been devised down into the worst thing, which is probably politics. I mean, if you're not a Democrat, you're not a progressive, you're not a Republican, you're not a liberal, you're not a libertarian. I have fucking problems with them all, because the one thing I see in them all that I have an issue with is nobody cares about anybody else's points. Everyone's got the most valid of points because their information has led them to the path that they're on. Their path's not wrong. Your path's not wrong. Everybody's just on a separate path. And the fact that you can't let them touch, it's like mashed potatoes and peas. When they get close to each other, everyone's like, no, I want those separate. But then there's the person that likes them all jammed in the middle. I'm like, that's kind of everything. You're supposed to have everything jammed up in the middle. If I didn't have multiple perspectives running into my head of, what you might say, what this might go, or where this might go, or where this road's going to lead me, or that road's going to lead me, then I don't know. I consider that valuable, but people rather just stick on what they think is their thought of their road. And I'm like, is it though? And is that the only one that's valuable? Because you think an ethereal being, some type of Dr. Manhattan character, is thinking you are 100% right. No, there's no way. There's no possible way. He's got to be open to it all. And all that stuff. I started thinking about Dr. Manhattan when I would watch him in the films and the movies, and he would be like, none of this stuff matters to me. There's so much more that you guys don't understand. Like, but we're your family. That doesn't mean anything to me now. I have more power than I could possibly imagine. There's infinite of you. I used to think that guy was a dick, but then I started going, oh, it's because you don't see what we see. We see the earth as this earth. But imagine 100 years from now, or people might be living on Mars, or people might be living on another planet or something. It sounds far-fetched, but I mean, we're going there. It's going to end up leading somewhere with that. I start going, when you understand that this earth that we care about now, and there's more of a planet like Earth in a different way, in a different variety, a different home, a different place you're living on, you're going to care less about it. And that's what you got to kind of keep in hold, is when your information, your dome or your wall goes farther, instead of giving you to the end of your driveway to run, now you get to go down the street. Oh, more power. That driveway seems so small now. Yeah. It keeps going and going and going and going and going. And I think that's fascinating to me.
Exactly. I've no idea who Dr. Manhattan is, but I take the point anyway. And it's a good point. Okay, show me a picture.
There was a movie called Watchmen back in the day.
I know Watchmen. Yeah.
So the giant blue guys, Dr. Manhattan.
Is he? Okay, the giant blue guy, right.
You got to see my Twitter. I put up an art piece. It's me as Dr. Manhattan with like 6 arms, but I'm holding up like separate things.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, all right, I know who he is now. Yeah, well, that's exactly it. So to bring psychedelics in finally late in the day, that's kind of what I'm getting at as well in terms of perspective, because all of these things, the politics, the well, things that seem to have dominated the media in Britain, and I think in America as well. Well, we've basically imported so much from over there. So we had the whole obsession with Trump, you know, for and against, blah, 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 going on and on. We had the obsession with Brexit that went on and on and on. Now we have the obsession with COVID going on and on and on. And there's, you know, for each of these, there's both sides, for
People
and against.
Fear.
Yeah, it's fear, you know, but, you know, also it's this ambiguity, like, you know, is Trump a crazy, like, dictator guy? Is he this, that, or what? You know, is Brexit this terrible? No one really knows, but every day on the news, it's this continuous, almost obsessive, compulsive thing, which actually is very strict. Again, I say I don't watch the news, but just from what I've kind of like gleaned from, you know.
Well, they just did the same thing recently. That's just real big that you'll see is with the Rittenhouse thing. The dude had his hands up in the air.
I've heard of that as well.
He had a gun in his hand, but the news said guy was shot with hands in the air, and it distorted a whole perspective that people didn't understand. This person had a gun in his hand. Like there was it's a lot of, they choose and pick. And also I think at the same time, there's that factor that they're afraid to say the truth because their audience now is people that side with that perspective. So it's so
but
hard
anyway, the basic point is that all of these things that at the time seemed so like world-shatteringly important and amazing, and like, you know, like the people who had what you'd call was it TDS, Trump derangement syndrome? You know, we had Brexit derangement syndrome, people going crazy about that, people who have COVID derangement syndrome, the whole masks thing, I don't know, this other thing now. And it's like, at the time, it's almost like the media, the social media, the whole algorithms, the way it's set up is to make you believe that this is so important and it's so crucial, and we've got to just really like fight for this cause, whatever side you're on, it doesn't really matter, or like really care about this thing. And like, you know, I used to say, it's tomorrow, you know, today's newspaper is tomorrow's like chip paper. Do you know what I mean? It's like, now Trump's out of office, now Brexit's done, COVID will pass. Once you get that perspective and you see that all of this hype, all of this stuff that's being sold to us as if this is like so important, all it's doing is it's keeping you clicking. It's just a way to keep you stuck in this system of
loop.
It's a loop, and you're just kicking you the loop, and it's irrelevant what the content is. It's like, as long as you are basically fired up enough and care enough to keep watching, you know, it's like those it's like a film.
I think,
you know, it's just
well, I start to think is, I think what's valuable is if you like religion and that's how you get through the day, that's valuable. If you are not in belief of that, then that's valuable. I think you're doing everything you possibly can to make sure that you can still stay sane in a world so crazy. And it goes back to like we were talking about, like it's like the kid with the adult and the adult with the sage, or, you know, that whole thing. Who does the grandpa play with? He plays with the child. It's a cycle.
Yeah,
it's the same loop over and over and over and over again. And it makes me think more and more, where I start wondering, like with all these ideas and all this information that starts coming out, like disclosure of UAPs and stuff, I'm like, what are you keeping from us? Are you keeping people from who they intentionally? Imagine if we all found out we were cannibals, like the whole civilization, society is built on cannibalism. I'm not saying that that's not a possibility. I'm not saying it is a possibility. I'm just saying that information, though, all because these people felt like they needed to keep that from you because it might be.
Soylent Green. Do you remember the film Soylent Green?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That was a big thing when that company came out too. But I start to look at things, and I think that saying that someone's opinion or anybody's thoughts are invalid, it just doesn't sit right with me. And I think the idea that, like, I have an ego issue. Actually, when you were complimenting me on the episodes of the show, that I was about to just tell you to stop. I can't do that because you let that door open for that demon, and that demon comes in and then it never goes out. I stare up at the stars at night sometimes when my head gets too big, and I try and understand that everything that I am worried about right now, everything that seems like it's too much, is too small in the grand aspect of things. And I think that's how people have to start viewing things. I think the idea that we can't live in harmony, it seems so far-fetched, and it might be ridiculous. but there's a way to get there, but you got to make sure everyone's coming to the table clean. Everything now is a chess game of moves and options and ways that people want to get something for themselves instead of rather just, I mean, do you really get anything from doing this show? You get an episode recording you can put on your resume, maybe? I don't know how you would display it, but more than that, you're just getting a conversation. For a lot of people, I've gotten the responses that are like, it's not worth the time. No matter how much effort or no matter, they don't care to know who I am because they don't see any value in it for themselves. Necessarily doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It just means in a selfish way, which how we all kind of are, is that you want to find something that works for you. Me, I get a podcast episode, but at the same time, once we end this, you could say, I don't want it published. Ain't no scratch off my back. I still had a conversation with you, which was the intended goal of the thing because I respect who you are. That's kind of how people have to walk into things. People don't enter a space thinking that it's going to be good. People enter a space looking for something that they can refute that might be misinformation now. And I don't necessarily think we understand what misinformation is. I don't think we understand what disinformation is. I think we're all getting the wrong information. I think the fact that we think that our information is right is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just aware of the guy behind me here, and just listening to you talk, I'm getting a kind of vision of these two different views of what we're doing and what the whole point of it is. And you know, this image of the table and everyone coming to the table and all these different, you know, thrashing out all these ideas and respecting each other's opinions. But in a way, that's the kind of, let's say that's a humanist kind of vision, yeah, where basically we have to rub along and we have to get together and get along somehow, yeah. We can find a certain amount of unity, maybe some peace, maybe there'll be a bit of war, maybe we'll find our tribe, and then we'll be part of something bigger than just us. Maybe we'll just be atomized individuals, just all being, you know, kind of like anarchy, whatever. But at the end of the day, this is a level playing field. The table as an image is horizontal. So our egos are all just like knocking against each other, and that's life in a way, and you have to accept it, etc. So that's kind of like the humanist vision. The religious vision, at least the Christian, but with most religions we have a different version, is that we're not really different egos that have our own egoic, let's say, right to our identity and who we are, whatever. But although we kind of,
we have no identity.
Well, let's say no. We respect and we recognize that we do have that. Okay, so obviously, I'm not saying that we don't have egos, but that the aspiration is for each of the believers, let's say, is that ultimately our essential self, who we really are beyond the personality and the ego, that we're aspiring to become, is something embodied or symbolized in something like Jesus.
I think he's probably the ideal person.
He's the ideal person. So in a way, the whole mystical way they talk about it in the New Testament as the body of Christ, etc., is basically that it's a one. It's wait. Let me just finish the idea that okay, it's one person, it's one thing, and that we're all the unity. We all become one through this participation in this one ideal. You see what I mean? So ultimately, we lose our ego because we share in this kind of unitive consciousness, which is represented in that symbol, if you know what I'm saying.
I probably agree with most of the morals that he has, you know, having a bunch of people sit down and have a meal together without any fighting or anger or arguments being displayed. It's the same thing people relate with Gandhi. Like, why can't everyone just be, you know, happy or be loving or all these to each other?
Yeah.
Am I saying that's the wrong ideal? No, it's probably one I agree with the most. But expecting everyone to be a Jesus Christ-like figure is just damn near impossible because from the start, we've messed up the deck already. This timeline is screwed, Sebastian. That's what it is. This whole world would have to restart again and try and find a new way without entering in these spoils. But I think that's an inevitable thing. I feel like this has always been the case.
Why so pessimistic?
I think that's pretty optimistic. The idea that we can do it again, I think a lot of people blame something else for the way that their life has turned out. And I am at fault for doing that at times too. But what I started to realize more is the fact that I keep blaming something else. What am I doing to change the perspective that I'm in? So I'm just constantly blaming something rather than focusing in on something. People do this all the time, and it's still going on today, multiple times a day in various different places. And I can sit there and blame that the Eden scenario or whatever scenario, but I can also look at what am I doing to change that? I'm not really doing a whole lot, but I'm also not shutting down anybody from being who they are. I'm not going to want to change anybody. I don't care to change anybody. I don't have the time in my aspect. I have to still work on myself in some aspects.
Yeah. So
But
if you're working on yourself, then the assumption is that you could be a better person than you are now.
I lost who I am. There's no way I'm going to find it. There's no possible way you're going to be the Sebastian that you would be if there was no war, if there was no none of that. There is no possible way. That's who we were supposed to be. I bet you that's why the aliens are here like, oh, damn it, they're too far off the map. We had an original figure, but we let starvation, we let all these political stuff, we let everything all into the table. Is that saying that with religion, for instance, there's plenty of other religions out there? They all have the same fucking ideals, though. The same ideals of there's this afterlife, there's being a good person, but there's different methods of being a good person in different various religions. So they're all good to aspire to. Everybody be whatever religion you want. I don't care. But I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are trying to change people in some aspects in life. And I don't know if that's everyone, though. I think a lot of people that I've started to notice with taking the whole thing off social media as well, too, is that they're not as bad as how it is on Twitter. They're not as bad as how they're on any social media platforms. I start to see that like people aren't essentially this world isn't filled with hate. And I think a lot of people either love that they think that it's still filled with hate. And it's like the same thing with masks. There are people that want masks back. There are people places that are doing it because I don't know if they think this thing, they've been maybe told that it helps or does this type of thing. I don't know. But there's people that just don't want to go to work. There's people that just don't want to do this. It's where I start to come in and be like, what is going on? Like you start to, I think asking questions is the only definitive in life. The fact that you can still doesn't mean that the answer you get is going to be right. But I think it helps you kind of decipher once you start realizing that there's the same story but 80 different books describing it in different ways. You start filling in the pieces of like, okay, maybe these were all just kind of thoughts, and maybe now that I have all these perspectives in my head, I can see which one I fit with the best. And that's kind of what everyone's doing on social media. They do that with anything that gets released. I'm going to cherry pick the information I like. And it's like, it's not, you're not wrong because you agree with what those things are. Like if I told you like, if I showed you a video of the Rittenhouse thing, there's two answers you would say, and those two answers would decide what party you're in. There's questions like that throughout life. There's people that love a nuclear family idea of a mother and a father taking care of their kid and raising them to be this good person. There's people that have never had that don't agree with those notions. You start seeing like there's just a conglomeration of thoughts and perspectives. And maybe at one point we could all agree on something, but I think where we're at right now, I think there's just been so much happening around us that's changed us that we have to find a way to reset it. And I think a way to reset that would be to understand that you got to go just explore the world. You can't come at people with hostilities. You can't act like you know all. You can't act like you do this. I don't know anything. I'm just speaking, but I don't have hate in my heart. I'm open to talking to everybody. And I think that's what everyone has to come to do. But a lot of people just see that as a waste of time and what would they gain from it? The only thing I have is I don't really gain anything. I don't make money from this. I don't make money from doing anything. If it's an hour of my time, it's whatever. I don't see, I think we base too much stuff on what's going to affect our life, whether it's going to be dangerous or profitable. Necessarily that might stop us from being a good person. That might stop us from being somebody that might help out someone in a situation. Someone might hear this episode and get something from it where it helps them out in a scenario. That's what I'm saying is like, are you thinking now instead of long sighted? The guy who owns McDonald's, do you think he thought everyone was going to hate him for making the whole generation obese? No, he made a product, and sadly, people are addicted to that product. He only cared about getting rich. He didn't care about the people that followed after him. I think it's more about looking not at your life, but at the legacy that you leave. Possible? Maybe. I don't know. You got me in a weird hole with this deep shit. I rarely get into this, but I have been contemplating my existence for like the past month now, I think.
Okay. Well, maybe that's a good point to finish then. I think we've been rambling for long enough, I imagine.
Did I exhaust you? A little bit.
And a little bit. But I need to
it's getting dark where you're at. I saw the whole room just change to blue. But I appreciate you for giving me your time, Sebastian. Is there a place where people can find you?
That's my pleasure. Yeah, my website, www.pachananda.com. Maybe you can write that down because that's not going to be remembered. And I'm
going to
on
link
Twitter.
it in the description.
So yeah, link it in the description. Yeah, that's
but
the place.
What about second book? We got the second book. Possible?
It's there. It's all basically the blogs on the website is enough for a second book. So at one point I will put it all together. Yeah.
I want a physical copy. I could take an Instagram picture of me hugging it. You know what I'm talking about?
One day. Yeah, I'll get it together. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you for giving me your time, and I'll make sure I link it all in the description.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode Out of the Blank.